We'll get them all set up. This meeting is being recorded so that it can go on to the 4th Division's website. This is the January clinic for Olympia. We just had a really nice dinner here at Panorama. Thank you, Don Melnick. Don stepped out. Where'd he go? Well, thank you, Don, for helping get this set up. And we are going to get going. So our goal here every January is to have some prototype discussions led by some prototype modelers or prototype people who happen to be modelers this time. To have real engineers describe what it's like to run a real train and to help us outsiders understand what we can do to make our operating sessions more realistic. So that's the goal of this event here. I was going to thank Steve Shores because this really came up from an idea that he had probably 6 months ago when we were talking about what kind of clinics we might like. So we're going to do the prototype clinic this month. Next month will be a clinic from people with small sized railroads and how to do operations on a small sized railroad.
For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow.
So say all of us.
Don just walked back in for those of you who can't see that. Thank you, Don, for helping us get this set up. So February will be prototype, or will be operations on small layouts. March will be operations on large layouts. And we'll see what's the same and what might be different. And then in April, we've got operations with JMRI. So we're really doing 4 different months on operations. So tonight we've got Greg Ammer in the center there with BNSF in the Seattle area, Alan Manson with UP from the Seattle to Portland corridor, and Tyler Whitcomb, a previous UP engineer for Seattle to Portland, and once in a while a few other places. Yeah, so I remember him saying. So here we're going to get going. Model Railroader said in September of 2023 issue that there are only 3 moves you need to understand to operate: the shove, the pull, and the runaround. Sounds pretty simple. So now can you guys explain what that means and anything else you think might be critical to making our model railroad operations fun and realistic? And if you could, for us, what controls your train assignments and card movements? Is that paper? How does that work? And to finish up, what are 1 or 2 things we can do with our model operations to increase realism and fun? People that are on the Zoom, please use the text or the chat feature. Brian's monitoring the chat, and if you have questions, it'll come through there, or if you're having trouble hearing or whatever. And we're going to mess around with the volume probably a little bit here, make sure everybody can hear, and we'll be on our way. So I'm going to hand the microphone to Tyler.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tyler Whitcomb. Talk about operations. Hi. Talk about operations. It's true. It's ahead, back up, and
Closer.
ahead, back up, and then I'll move. So forward, backwards. That's pretty much all I can do on a locomotive. A runaround move is running around a train car, basically. So you'll go forward, you go on a parallel track, run around to the other end to get on the other end of it. So a lot of times that's used at switching moves. Do you want to add something to it, Rick?
Yeah, that's basically it. As an engineer, like Tyler said, I'll say the same. Just basically going backwards and forward all day long. Especially me, I work on yard jobs and I go backwards just as much as I go forward. So a shove is, backing up. And usually you're handling cars and shoving them into a track. Sometimes you'll have cars from both into your engines, shoving in, pulling at the same time. And yeah, the runaround is.
What would be your favorite locomotive for visibility as you're, trying to figure out where the heck you're going backwards and forwards?
You could repeat the question.
The question was, what is a favorite locomotive for visibility for, and for myself, it would have been the SW series locomotives, but we don't run them anymore. They're all scrapped.
I got one.
Yeah.
SW 1200.
Yeah, an SW 1200 or SW 1500, SW 1000. All those, what do they call them? NCAB. NCAB models. Great visibility, especially when you're going backwards because the cab's on the back. And then after that, it's, any older series EMD, you know, a GP or an SD. Just you have the better visibility along the back side of the motor. I think another question that Greg had was about what you need to be prepared for the job.
Yeah, what's a day look like for you?
Today, I'm gonna pass it to Alan because he brought a bunch of sample material about kind of how the day unfolds or whatever. So
the paperwork that I brought pertains to through freights, not switching. So what you see there is a call sheet, a set of UP orders or track condition messages, and general track bulletins for the B and GTVs, and then train lists. And that's everything that's necessary to proceed on through freight.
On the mic closer.
As far as switching is concerned, the trainmen, the foremen, the switchmen are issued switch lists. That isn't something that the engineer needs to see. All I need to know is to go forward or go backwards. And stop, yeah, hopefully before I crash too severely. Yeah, so there you go. As far as favorite locomotive types, total agreement. My personal favorite are similarly SWs, but UP, same story, they're all gone. Next would probably be a good old SD40-2, or what the UP is currently designated an SD40N. But great power to this day. A little worn out, but still good power.
So how do you get your assignments?
Repeat the question.
How do you get assignments? If you're on the extra board or on the pool, you wait until the phone rings, and they tell you what you're going to do, what your job is. If you work through freight, that's all you're going to get called for is something from your home terminal or from your away from home terminal. If you're on the extra board, it could be anything, through freight, yard job, local.
How much notice do you get?
Our agreement calls, actually for the trainmen, their agreement calls for a 2-hour call. Engineers are only required to receive an 1.5-hour call, but we generally get a 2-hour call as well.
What does that mean?
From the time you receive that call, you have 2 hours to report on duty.
Greg, what about switching? If you're doing a switch job, how do you get your assignment?
the switch jobs are all, everything's seniority based, and so the switch jobs are all bid on, and you hold what you want to hold by your seniority. So you just show up at your prescribed time for the job that you're marked to. And there's regular switch jobs that have a regular shift, and then there's also relief jobs that cover the days off on other switch jobs. So they may work days and then work afternoons and then work at night, or something to that extent. But you know what you're going to work. You're already assigned to a job. So.
And you show up to the same place every day?
Yeah, you show up. Typically, yeah. But yeah, if you're on a relief job, you may work. Like I might work in Tacoma for 2 days, and then in Auburn for 2 days, and then back in Tacoma for a day, or work in Seattle for a day, or West Seattle for a day, and then Harbor Island for a day, and then 2 days up at Interbay. You know, so it's basically in the terminal. But question?
When you're doing stuff like that, going to different yards, you know, how long does it take to kind of get in the rhythm of the geography of a yard, the track layout, or
It's
is there a steep learning curve there, or you just kind of?
Yeah, you don't really get used to it right away because there's so many tracks. It takes a while to get to everything, and I think I've worked long enough where I think I've been on every track in Seattle, and that includes most of the UP tracks also. But same with Tacoma. You know, I've been in just about every track in Tacoma and up at the Muni, and but yeah, it's a lot to learn because there's so many tracks, so many switches, different ways to get to different tracks, different rules on different tracks somewhat, different speeds on sometimes, you know, and so it takes a while. And when you start out, you're on an extra board, you know, usually, and you're going to different yards. You go to, you know, I started out, I was in Longview, I was in Centralia, and on through freight, you know, you'd stop there and you work in Centralia and you don't have any idea where you're at. And then I'd be in Longview and then I have no idea where I'm at. And they'd send you over the bridge onto some other railroad across the river, and I don't even know where that's at, you know. So it takes a long time to get used to it. You're hoping that oftentimes you're working with somebody that's done it. And if not, you know, a lot of times you're fumbling your way through to get the experience. Or
On the other end of kicking one car at a time or so in an industry, say it's an SW 1200, how many could you kick or pull? About what's flat ground? What's more or less the limit?
Go ahead.
with that SW, okay, the question was about basically how many cars you can handle with an SW 1200. And in my experience, I would say a comfortable cut of cars, which is the amount of cars, is probably about 15-ish, you know.
15?
Yeah, around 15 with an SW.
I'm gonna need a bigger lithium battery.
Yeah, you know, and it depends on how heavy those cars are. The good thing, one of the good things about an SW is it doesn't have enough power to get you too many cars going. I mean, you can get a big cut going, but you're not going to get going very fast on it. But the brakes are basically balanced out to what you can pull on those things. Whereas if you get a Jeep, you know, a GP locomotive, you can pull a hell of a lot, but the brakes don't correspond with what you can pull.
Hope you got some air.
Yeah, so that, and Alan had mentioned he likes the SD40-2, and I totally agree, because it has the power and the braking and to correspond, but yeah. You know, pass to somebody else want to answer.
Yeah, let Tyler have a minute. So Tyler, you said that you worked the Seattle to Portland corridor, but you also did some stuff down towards Bend, is that right?
Yeah.
And so what was that like to leave from here and head off to someplace that you had no idea where you were going?
So the question was, where else have I worked, basically, and what is it like? So I worked the Bend branch during the slide, 08, I believe it was, somewhere around there. And so I was a brand new engineer with no seniority, so I didn't have a choice. The phone rang, they said, you're going down to the Dalles. I said, okay, where's the Dalles? I said, it's down south. Okay, well, they show up at this hotel and the phone will ring and go to work 2 hours later. Okay, great. So I did that, and I got a pilot my first 2 trips. So it was kind of funny because none of us knew where we were. UP hasn't ran on the track forever. They used to have a local that goes up there, but those guys have retired and so forth, and so they're gone. And so it was the blind leading the blind. So I had a guy that's only been over the road twice. That was it. And once, I think remember, one of his times was actually in a van, so it doesn't really count. Because it's deadheading. And so he was showing me the territory, and neither of us knew where we were at all. And it was ABS TWC, which block control signaling with track warrant control. And track warrant control is basically talking to dispatcher. He tells you how far you can go, not the lights. And so if you don't know where you are, you don't really know where to stop, of course. So, and then being a brand new engineer, I barely know how to run a locomotive. I mean, I got 8,000 tons, 9,000 tons. My train's 4,900 feet, and the signs are 5,000 feet. So, long story short, and DPUs were actually kind of brand new at the time too. So I was learning how to run DPUs, distributed power units. What's a DPU? A DPU is a distributed power unit. So it's a locomotive that's ran remotely from the head locomotive on the back. So it's basically a helper unit with nobody in it. Is what it is. It's all controlled from up front. So it was challenging. Let's put it that way. It was challenging to not know where you were and how to learn to run a train with very, very small sidings. Not really small. I mean, you know, 5,000 feet. So just a little bit over a mile, or just under a mile. Yeah, no question.
Tyler, when you're running distributed power, do you have a separate set of controls in the cab for the the rear engine, for example? Or are they slave to your main throttles?
So the question is, if I'm running DPUs, do I have a second set of controls? The answer is we have 2 screens on the locomotive. And so you technically, I guess you would say you have 2 different controls. Because you can control the remote unit from the leader. So you can put a fence up, and so let's say you're going over a hill, so you're cresting over the hill. So what I could do is I could have the leader in dynamics, like let's say 1 or 2 as the train comes over the hill, it's starting to bunch up, so I don't want it to run away. So the leader itself is dynamics, and the rear unit, the DPU, is still pushing me up the hill.
You're talking dynamic braking?
Dynamic braking, yeah.
Wow.
So we talk about getting lost all the time. There's no maps in these locomotives?
So the question is,
No GPS?
how do you know where you are on the railroad?
Hopefully you're working with somebody who knows where
Yeah, like Alan says, hopefully you're working with somebody who you know, who's been there for a while, has got more whiskers, more seniority than you.
That's it.
Oh, you're arguing with the Greg, he's got something to add.
Yeah, as far as maps,
Talk about PTC.
yeah, there is a PTC on mainline, and I think it's pretty much somewhat universal now. And it's a schematic like we would see on our model railroads. And it has, it's colored. Red means you're not authorized to go past a certain location. Green means you're good to go. Yellow means
Slow down.
slow down, basically. But and then this is when I started, which is 20 years ago. There was some people had hand-drawn maps that they had for locations, but in BNSF, at least in the Seattle area, has put a big effort into having maps done. It's by a local switchman that does it, but they're very nice maps of all the yards. And the yards are where you really get confused. I mean, it's, and Argo. I mean, the signal Argo.
Oh.
Argo Bailey triangle there. But you got anything to add?
I got it.
Maybe, oh, I got something.
So also with the PTC, one thing, I don't know if anybody's ever used it here or even seen it before, but PTC will also show you where all your curves are, which is really, really nice. So if you're going a left-hand curve, so it'll show the line that you're on, and it'll show a little box on the side that shows how long the curve is. If you're gonna go left-hand, if you're gonna go left or right.
I didn't even know that.
And, it also will show where your work areas are. So if you have a Form B coming up, there's people working on the tracks, tell you where you have to stop. It'll show your milepost locations on there. Does it show speed, Alan?
Yeah.
It
Max
tells,
speed.
the PTC screen provides quite a bit of information, speed being a critical piece. It tells you what the current maximum authorized speed is. It tells you what an upcoming speed restriction is and how far away it is. And if you don't take steps within a reasonable amount of time prior to that restriction, it starts making a ruckus to grab your attention and tell you that you have X number of seconds. It usually counts down from 45 seconds until it will put you into a penalty brake application. If you're approaching a location where you need to stop, it will stop you before you reach that location. If it's a speed restriction, it'll stop you probably before you reach the speed restriction, but you just need to slow down. So, anyway, it displays curvature, it displays gradient. It doesn't tell you what the grade is, but it's a rough representation of grade. Speed restrictions show, if you're cleared to proceed, the line is green. If there's a speed restriction, that segment of track shows as yellow, temporary speed restriction. If you're approaching a location where you need to stop, the block immediately preceding that stopping point will display as yellow.
So you've got a display there that's giving you that information and sort of telling you where you are.
Yeah, there's a computer display providing all of that information.
Tyler, you're talking about the display on PTC showing a curvature. Why do you care?
Well, sorry, the question is, why doesn't the engineer care if if it shows a curvature on the PTC screen? In the fog, when you think about it, it's extremely hard to see. You got that bright headlight. Sometimes you can't even see the end of the nose on the locomotive. It's that bad. And you're not really allowed to slow down. You're still doing 50 miles an hour in the fog, even though you can't see. So a lot of times you really focus on the track, and the curvature, whether it's a left-hand or right-hand curve, you know where you are, will really help you out to figure out where you are, especially before PTC. I learned to run before PTC, when you had to memorize every rock, every tree, everything, know exactly where the bridge is, where the crossings are. I've had a middle of the night where I've actually turned off my headlights to see where the crossing is, how far away from the crossing I am, and turn it back on. So that's why it's really important to know your territory.
So with the computer screen, are you spending more time looking at the computer screen rather than signals? And if there's a disconnect between the two, which one has priority?
Personally, I have a real problem with PTC. It's a wonderful tool. It provides a lot of information. It prevents you, it holds your hand. It prevents you from a stop violation, from a speeding violation. But the problem with it that I and many engineers that have been around for a while, pre-CTC, we find that newer engineers are extremely reliant upon it.
They never learn.
And they never learn the territory. They really don't know where they are. And if and when, and it will fail from time to time, they need to know where they are, and a lot of them just don't. So that's the brave new world we live in with PTC.
Comment on that real quick. And that's, when you say that, I met another engineer who had gotten in trouble for speeding, and I asked him what happened. And he said he's part of the PTC generation. I said, what's that mean? He goes, well, we don't know the speed limit anywhere. We rely on the computer to tell us. The computer went down, and he was going a lot faster than 25 miles an hour where he was supposed to be. So, oops. Yeah.
So some of the material that I passed out includes a few pages of reference material. There's a bunch of relevant information. The first page is all of the signals, not necessarily where they are, but if you know where you are according to the milepost location, you can suss out where the signals are located. The next page is general information. And one of the things that it includes is all of the speed limits between Seattle and Portland. There's a list of distances, so you can determine if your train will fit somewhere without blocking a crossing, hopefully, which is kind of hard to do when you run a 15,000 foot train. And then there's also a page with all of the crossings on the territory.
Who makes up the trains? In other words, you go to where you're picking up a train, take over the train. Did I hear that right?
Oh, he's talking about the yardmaster duties.
Yeah.
What is the
So your train
yardmaster
is
duties?
made up when you hop on it?
Yeah, for a through freight crew, the train is built and ready to go. They might have to double 2 or 3 or 4 tracks together to fully assemble the train, but it's otherwise air tested and ready to go.
Oh, okay.
Is that road crew doing it, or that's already done before you get in?
The road crew will typically do the final assembly of the train, because most trains don't fit in most yards. They've vastly outgrown the length of your average yard.
Well, how do you find that out?
I'm sorry.
How do you find that out?
How do you find that out? The yard master instructs you on the moves that are necessary to put your train together.
So when you report, you talk to the yard master is what you're saying?
Yes, when you report, you talk to the yard master. Jim?
I hate that I'm going to ask this.
What he's going anyway.
but what is your gentleman's take on the DuPont disaster? What would be your point of view?
Oh, boy.
No comment.
What is our take on the DuPont disaster?
The disaster.
Where do I start?
You're talking about the Amtrak
Yeah.
inaugural run on the.
Yeah, it's hard for a layman go on watch the TV or the newspaper to know what the real skinny is.
Yeah, I just, in my opinion, and this is, with whatever information that I've had, just been reading news reports, they weren't trained. The crews were not trained. And yeah, adequately. And, they relied on, you'll figure it out kind of attitude, I think, and then that's what happened. I mean, so I don't know, you have a different take, but
I got no comment.
All the other engineers figured it out after the first engineer put it in the pit. The bottom line, that engineer was lost. He thought he was one block back from where he actually was. He knew there was a slow curve coming up, but he lost track of where he was. When they were taking their familiarization trips, there were multiple trainees, if you will, in the cab of the locomotive. Only the opportunity to actually get any throttle time, which is important when you're learning a new territory. If you're just not sitting in the engineer's seat, it doesn't, for me at least, it doesn't stick as readily.
Yeah.
You need to actually be running the engine to get a sense of where you're at. There were too many distractions. They weren't given enough runs to learn the territory. I'm sure conversation in the cab was distracting. More than that, the location where the derailment took place was just a short distance before the junction at Nisqually, where it rejoins the double track main line. During their familiarization trips, the signals that they would have been receiving were restrictive. There was a signal located, is a replacement signal located at the location of the derailment, that if you're not lined through the junction, it displays an approach restricting, or which is a yellow over a flashing red. And that tells you need to be at restricted speed at the next signal. That's what they would have seen on a regular basis during their familiarization trips, because there wouldn't have been any reason for them to actually go down and occupy the double track main line. So the inaugural day comes. I'm of the opinion that the main reason that engineer lost track of precisely where he was, and keep in mind it's dark. It was in the early morning hours when this happened. He's used to seeing an approach restricting at that 30-mile-an-hour curve. And on the morning of, he's looking at a clear block, a green signal. And apparently it didn't register that he was there. He needed to be down to 30 miles an hour and he didn't make it. By the time he realized where he was, it was way too late.
I have a question from the chat. Going back to the layout of yards and tracks, how are they indicated? Are they known by a name or by number or a combination of it? If somebody says, pull into track 3, how do you know what that is?
How are yard tracks identified?
Or any tracks?
Any tracks identified. So in the yard, most tracks are numbered, some tracks are named. And for the most part, that's just institutional knowledge. The target on the switches might be labeled, heavy on the might. Quite often they're not. And so it's just a matter of knowing the yard. Same thing on the main line. There's either, if it's single track, it's just the main. If there's 2 or more, it's might be main 1, main 2, main 3. Through Tacoma, for example, there's the Tacoma main 1, which is actually in the middle, and then main 2. So yeah, it comes with time, learning the territory. So running the train is actually the easy part. Knowing where the heck you're at is the hard part. It takes time to learn the territory.
So Alan, you said you may have to put your train together, but it's already made up. Greg, is that the same for you on running a switch job, or do you actually put your
Yeah, running the
Short
switch stuff, we put the trains together and we break them down and deliver them to the customers usually, you know, so depending on the job, there's some jobs that are just switching the lead, they train comes in, they switch it out and, you know, separate the cars, classify the cars out into where they're gonna be going, and then the industry switch jobs, pick them up and bring them to wherever they're going, like in Seattle, they're going to Harbor Island, or they're going to Seventh Avenue, or they're going to West Seattle, or whatnot, so.
And you do that off a switch list then?
Oh, yeah. Yard master will make up a switch list, tell you which cars go where, and basically classify a you know, destination. And then either an industry job comes to collect cars to deliver them to customers, or if you're building a train, you know, a road crew eventually put the train together. You'll assemble it, you'll basically build the train. A carman will come out and inspect the train, do an air test on it. And then the road crew will put the train together, assemble it, usually 3-4 cuts maybe of cars before tracks, get it all together, test that they have continuity in their rear end device works or their distributed power works, and take it from there.
And Tyler, when you were working down around Bend, did you do, was that a mainline run or was that what we would call a local run in the model railroad world?
So the question was, when I ran on the Bend branch, what kind of running did I do? So we ran detour trains. So it was a get on and get off for the most part. There was no switching. It was great. So it'd come up from Klamath Falls, the crew would get off, I'd get on, I'd take it to Bend, I'd get off, a new crew would get on it and take it to Portland. So there was no switching whatsoever. It was just kind of a dream job, I guess you'd say at that point. So usually like in the yard, like Alan says, you have to double up your train or triple it up or so forth. I also worked quite a few years in a 5-yard, kicking cars, we always call it. You just, you're shuffling cars, one car here to this track, one car here to this track, a few to this track. And what you do is you build trains for the destinations. So like it's gonna go to North Platte. So you have to pre-block your cars. So the cars are going to Portland. You want those in the head-ins because those are gonna be set out first. You don't want 4 cars for Portland and 2 for North Platte and 3 more for Portland or for Salem or wherever they're going. You want them in solid blocks. So the model railroading industry, or the model railroading, just like in the real world, you want to make it as easy as possible on your crews. So you want things pre-blocked, so that way your op sessions be a lot smoother.
And you're doing that off of some sort of a manifest of whatever every car's number and where it goes?
Yeah, so the question is how do I know where a car goes? So the switch list that the yard master prints out, or in 5, we used to be our own footboard yard master, they used to call it, where we had to figure out where the cars go. So the way bills say where the cars will go. So it'll say CNW, whatever the number is, goes to this industry in North Platte. So we see a little NP after the initial on the switch list and be like, oh, North Platte. So this car goes North Platte. This one goes to Eugene. This one goes to Klamath Falls, and you just switch them out accordingly. So you generally designate a track for each location, and then once all the cars are switched out, you double them up according to the how they're going to fan out further on down the line.
Are you trying to block all cars together in a train for North Platte particular industry, or are you just lucky to get them in the North Platte train?
So the question is, when I'm blocking cars, how do I exactly block them out for a particular town?
Yeah.
I really don't care about that.
Okay.
All I care about is that block is going to North Platte, because I don't know what the industries are like down there. I don't know which one's first for the yard job or the switch crew, how they want them switched out. So being in Seattle, my whole job is just send them east as quickly as possible. So just send that solid block east.
Thank you.
Another consideration in simply switching them out according to destination is hazardous material placement. Certain hazardous materials can't be next to other certain hazardous materials. Combustible hazmat can't be next to a possible ignition source like a mechanical refrigerator car. There's tonnage issues. You generally speaking, you want loads at the front of the train and empties toward the rear of the train. They can be mixed up, but there's rules that govern tonnage issues. There's long cars next to short cars. You can't have that. So like you can't have a 30, 35 foot tank car next to a 89 foot auto rack. That's not acceptable. So there's a number of things to consider, and generally speaking, the yard master makes those determinations for you. But sometimes it might be necessary to rearrange a few cars after you're done switching out a track. One of the things that when a crew is finished switching a track out, they tell the yard master they're done. And then the yard master will update that switch list. And if they haven't already figured it out, that updated information might flag a placement issue. And then the yard master will notify the crew, and they might have to make some adjustments to how things are built.
So we're talking a whole lot here about knowing your train, knowing the territory, knowing your destination. From the time that you report to work to the time when you're expected to be throttled down, how much time do you have to study your train? Know where you're going, know what's in it, know where all these placements are, who's responsible for making sure that the 30 footer by the 80 footer never happens. It's like, oh, we got one of these halfway back. I guess I need to know that, or something.
Well, hopefully
Train handling.
hopefully the yard master, hopefully the system that records and updates this information, between the two of them, hopefully they will catch any discrepancies. Sometimes issues slip through. Ultimately, it's the crew's responsibility. They need to review the list, and I'm sorry to say that a lot of crews don't bother. But it's a joint effort to make sure that everything is assembled appropriately.
How long do you have from the point you climb into the engine until you're supposed to be rolling?
How much time until you're supposed to be moving after you're on duty time? Depends on the manager you talk to, or the era or the period you're talking about. For a while, the expectation was that we would be out the door, headed for our train within 20 minutes on duty. That's asinine. Half an hour at the least was probably typical in my experience, and even a little bit longer for those of us that work the Seattle-Portland territory, because not only are you reviewing UP orders, we also have to review BNSF orders, which are generally more extensive. There's more information, more restrictions that we need to be aware of. So I tended to ignore that 20-minute rule. Most of us did, and I think the company finally figured out that was just an unreasonable expectation.
Yeah, that's a lot to study on what you passed out. Tyler, when you're talking about hot seat in the locomotive train going through, how long do you know what's coming while you're sitting there waiting for it to show up and jump inside ahead of time, or you just do a high five and read all you can before you got to go again?
Generally, you read the paperwork and you go over it, and
so you have it before it arrives.
I have my paperwork that shows what the train is. Okay. So it shows like the weight, the tonnage on it, where your hazmat is, because most likely it's already gone past the reader, which the reader identifies what cars in the train and what placement they are.
Okay. You're not surprised.
Generally, you're not surprised. So I have been surprised before, or sometimes they give me the wrong paperwork. They get out there to jump on a train at East Champ or West Champ or whatever, and it says I have a grain train. I'm looking at a manifest train. That's completely different. Let's put it that way. It's completely different. So you have to get new paperwork and look over that part of it. But your orders themselves, like Alan says, we spent a great deal of time on the BN. Probably 90% of our trip is actually on the BN. So you have to have all your ducks in a row for the UP side of it, where your Form Bs are, your Form Cs, all that kind of stuff. Which, like I said, it's the maintenance in the way, as I call them, and your speed restrictions, and then you have your BN stuff to look up as well. But Yeah, that's why I said it's kind of a dream job to jump on them and jump off them like that. Usually there's some type of working route. Like Greg was saying, you might stop at Longview. What was that train called? Ellen, the HKSE, I think it was, at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're dead tired. You always had to stop at Longview. Set out a big cut of cars, like 50, 60 cars. You're dead tired. It's foggy. You can't see anywhere. There's no lights. Your conductor is brand new, has no idea where he is. And not only that is a yard is actually built on a Y. So I think there's like 5 tracks that go this way, and then the other 5 tracks go the opposite direction. So how does that pertain to model railroading? Is label everything for your crews. Show them where every track is, every spot number is. Just give them a heads up, because most operators, model railroaders, well, I wouldn't say they don't read. No, they do read. They don't want to read a novel, is what it is. They do read. But they only operate once or twice a month, and it might be on your layout, it might be on a friend's layout. So they might only operate on your layout every 6 months.
Greg, switching world different? As far as how much time you have to be out, to be moving, and how much paper you have to look at?
Yeah, it also depends on the manager. Typically we'll take about an hour, maybe 2, depending on what's going on. But yeah, and then as far as, what you're looking at, you have your orders, which are Tyler and Alan said is, your any work going on the tracks, any speed restrictions, any track conditions that they want you to be aware of. And then you also have your train list or your switch list, whatever. When you're on a road train, your train list is a lot more important. The conductor will usually check to make sure that there's any issues with, like we were discussing earlier, about what's in the train and if it's built correctly. I mean, the conductor is ultimately responsible, supposedly, but that's not true. It's
Interesting.
Yeah.
The engineer's gonna go down with the ship
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. But yeah,
I know in the past, there's not been a lot of camaraderie between management and the train crews. But I guess the question I really got is, do you like your jobs?
do I like my job? I love my job. I absolutely love it. I love running a train. And if anybody asks me how was your day, I said they let me drive a train. So that's it. I mean, I don't have to put up with a lot of junk, I think, in my job, because I have seniority where I don't really have to put up with junk. I mean, I could pick jobs I want, so, but yeah, I love it.
He's been doing it for 20 years. He gets to hold the job he wants. I've been doing it for almost 30 years, and I can barely hold the job I want. Jim?
When you're assembling a train for departure and the cuts are on tracks 1, 2, and 3, so you're already connected to the cut on track 1, you pull forward, you back down to the cut on track 2, you make the joint, open the angle cocks. Is the air already there, or do you have to pump up that second cut? And what I'm driving at is, on a model railroad, should I count 1001, 1002, 1000? How long is the air already in the second and third cut, or do you have to take the time to pump that up?
So when doubling or tripling or quadrupling your train together, are those tracks already charged with air? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yes and no.
I should go with a girl like that.
The track that the power may already be attached to, if it's already attached, yes, that track should be charged and ready to move. The tracks that you go to next should not have any air on them. If they do, that's called bottling the air.
They head quick.
And yeah, and that's verboten. So it's necessary to charge each track as you go.
So that could be quite a while before you're ready to leave town.
It can take a while.
Yeah.
If you've got a monster train and it's 20 degrees outside, it's going to take a while. If you have DPUs in the train, that will help speed up the process. But if it's a typical train with power on the head end, it could take a while.
Thank you.
So kind of shifting the conversation, what can we do as layout hosts when we operate our layouts to make it be more prototypical or to kind of make it more like the real thing?
So that's one of the reasons we had this, is to try to figure that out. What can we do to make our layouts more realistic? We have this, we think, is the first time when our prototype speakers that we use in January have actually all slow bin model railroaders. So this is a special opportunity. Jim Sable made that comment earlier, and I think that's correct, unless somebody knows otherwise. So tell us, now translate this stuff into our railroad operations.
One thing that comes to mind is momentum that we know on our decoders. And working a switch job, especially working with a Jeep or something, trains don't stop very fast. So momentum is realistic. If you want to be realistic, put the momentum into your decoders. It gets annoying if it's too much, of course. The sound decoders makes it realistic for me. And as an engineer, I would say something like if you ever run with a proto throttle, that's something that is very similar to an EMD control stand, makes it realistic. And also having some kind of a train switching system, like a car cards or a switch list. It's very defined, because it brings into the I guess it makes it where you're actually having to do something, right? You're actually having to solve a problem. So having that actual, some kind of what they call it, a car forwarding system or something, definitely is a must, I guess.
And just to add to that, so some of the things I do for my in-Skelton Idaho Western, like we were talking about doing air tests, is I actually have little teeny blue lights or blue flags. So when my guys are actually out there working, my road crews aren't allowed to come in and tie onto the track. They actually have to wait till the lights are extinguished or the flag is down. Just like in when cars are being shipped, a lot of times the customers, when it gets to the other end, they empty their car, they don't clean them out. So it's really nice to have a clean out track or a rip track of some type. If you're running reefers, a lot of times, Alan knows it just as well as I do, is you'll get your switch list and you have to switch all these cars, and all of a sudden this yardmaster says, hey, take that reefer there and put it on track 11, it's almost out of fuel. So that's something you might also consider, just a random thing like that your yard crew has to do at the last second. Shifting loads when you're doing your inspections, when your brakeman or your foreman and your brakemen are out there walking the train, making sure every car sets up. Maybe they don't all set up. Half the time when I was out there, they don't set up.
What does that mean?
That means the brakes don't set up on the car, is what it means. But shifted loads, lumber loads shift constantly. Those banding straps get broken when the crews kick the cars, which means that you let them go at 8 miles an hour or something like that, and they run into a cement car that doesn't move. So the whole load just shifts. So that's something to consider. We were talking about Form A's and Form B's and things like that. Maybe set up a Form B on your railroad where your crew has to stop and call somebody, talk to somebody before you can get to that area. Or maybe there's some muddy track up ahead. So your dispatcher calls the crew up and says, hey, you gotta bring your train down to 10 miles an hour to that area. Anything you want to add? Huh?
It seems like a lot of what you guys have talked about takes a lot of time.
It does.
And I know that people get very anxious and want to get stuff done on a model railroad operation session. But it seems like taking time or, working through, reading the paperwork. You said you read the paperwork before you get on your training, you understand what you're doing before you go. And we as operators tend to just go and then read the paperwork or not even read it.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So maybe that's something.
Yeah, to slow things down. Oh yeah, definitely. Another thing I was thinking about is having multiple jobs. I have a very small layout, and you could do it with one person, but I'm going to run it with a 2-person crew. And that breaks it up so 2 people have to work together, right? you have a larger land, I see a lot of people have done this, they'll have a yard master, they'll have a dispatcher, and it makes it where that's realistic. You have to work with different people, and they're all having their own challenges and their own time, and it conflicts, and it doesn't always jive right, and that's why you get these bottlenecks and slowdown. But that's what makes it fun, right? It's a challenge for everybody then. So joint operation, I guess we'll say.
So when we work, we are limited to 12 hours to perform service. We can be on duty indefinitely beyond that, but we only have 12 hours to actually do the job. It is amazing. I couldn't tell you how many times I've used up 12 hours and I'm like, where did it go? What did we do? It's poof, it's gone. It takes an immense amount of time to sometimes to do the work that we do.
So you just get delayed and you work through what you didn't do yet.
Delay is a very common part of railroading. If nothing else, you're waiting for a train to get out of your way, or you're waiting for the yard master to make a decision about something. Maybe there's been an incident. Maybe you had a derailment or you ran through a switch. Doesn't happen that often, but it does occasionally. And you know, some manager has to come out and take a look and hopefully not pull you out of service. But yeah, pretty much every aspect of what we do takes a long time.
Question regarding yard switching. You know, in the model layout, we have a beautiful God view looking down on all the cars and know exactly the orders of things. We might be thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead, and I can put those two together. Is that realistic on what you have in the cab? Kind of a mental picture of what the whole cut is and what's doing it, or you're doing one car at a time?
Well, I don't get a bird's eye view. I get a view in the mirror to see if I can see my crew. That's about all I can see is a handful of cars behind me.
But planning stuff out ahead of time.
Yeah. So on a yard job, that's not something necessarily that the engineer needs to concern himself with. We're just seat warmers, throttle jockeys. We're going forward. We're going back. We're stopping. The foreman, the switchman. The guys on the ground, they're the ones who are thinking ahead on what moves are necessary, particularly the foreman. He's the one who's calling the shots. You know, it's like, okay, we're going to go into this track next and that track after. The engineer doesn't care.
Yeah, so Ryan, for your question, so as a foreman on the ground, I'm only 6 feet tall and those cars are 20 feet tall. So when I pull out a track, I can only see one car at a time. So if I'm pulling out 5,000 feet, I have to look at my switch list and line up each car. And a lot of times it might be out of order. So you have to stop the movement, say, okay, well, there's this car on this track, this. Okay, well, put this in sequence number 4 then, it's my 4th car. And so if you want to relate that to model railroading, you want to look at everything from eye level. So build your layout at 60 inches above the ground. And just pull up one car at a time. It's all you can do.
And
So,
a G-scale.
yeah, and remember, we're limited to 12 hours. So if you run a fast clock, you might only have 2 hours to do their whole job. And then at that point, you have to call somebody else to come finish your job for you.
So along those lines, we just had a question about how the foremen on the ground communicate with you in the yard. Is it all by radio, hand signals? What?
Communication amongst the crew. If you're within sight of each other, personally, I prefer hand signals. But most of the time it's over the radio. And hopefully you're not wrapped around a big building where line of sight is poor. Hopefully you have good communication, but that can be a challenge at times, especially when you're hanging on to like 4,000 feet of cars. And there's buildings between you and bridges. I switch in the south end of Argo Yard. There's a lot of obstacles between the engineer and his crew. So radio communication can be a challenge at times. Jim?
Oh, you gotta do some work in the yard before you can depart. You gotta pick up the cut on track 2, add the cut on track 3, who knows what else, pump up the air in both cases. boy, it's gonna be a while before you get out of town. Where's the conductor? Is he going along for a free ride, or does he wait until you're ready to blow twice and release brakes and go forward?
It's a subway.
Where is the conductor when you're building your train before
Yeah.
you can depart?
Yeah.
They're generally back at the switches, at the joints.
We're
They're
talking
the
two-man crew
ones.
though now,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, road cruiser too.
This is a two-man.
Yeah, well, on the UP side, pretty much all jobs are two crew members. But anyway, the trainman, the crew member that's on the ground, is responsible for protecting, if you will, providing the information for the engineer. When you pull out, they stop you when you clear a switch. When you're coming back to a joint, they give you car counts counting down to that joint so that the engineer is able to.
So there's a foreman and a conductor on the ground?
Well, foreman and conductor are effectively the same thing. A through freight and a local has a conductor on it. A yard jet has a foreman. They're still in charge of the work. Brakeman, switchman, same thing. Brakeman is on a through freight, and a local switchman's in the yard. But they're just the helper. So anyway, yes, the train person is going to be back at the switch, back at the joint, assembling the train. So until the train is fully built for an outbound train, they're going to be back there taking care of all of that. And then at some point, if it's not too far, they'll walk up to the head end. If it's too far, then a ride should be provided to get them to the head end. And generally, in that time, the engineer is waiting for the air pressure to build to an appropriate level on the rear end. So the brake pipe pressure is 90 psi, ideally. At the rear of the train, it has to be within 15 pounds. So it's got to be at least 75 pounds at the rear end. Generally, it's rather more than that, but it's rarely 90. It's almost always something less, unless you have a really small thing. But until it reaches 75 on the rear end, and I generally like to get it up to at least 80 pounds, at that point, we do a set and release, or what today is known as a class 3 air test. And what you do, and there's another consideration, there's airflow. The airflow has to be below 60 cubic feet per minute, CFM. And only then, as long as it's below 60 CFM and the pressure is 75 or higher on the rear, then you have to do a 20-pound reduction to set up the brakes, and you need to see a reduction of at least 5 pounds on the rear end. It's been a while since I studied all this, but you need to see a reduction on the rear end. And once everything evens out, settles down, then you release the brakes and again see a corresponding rise of pressure on the rear end. Only then are you legally able to depart the train.
I'm just glad to hear that my conductor cousin is not getting a free ride watching the scenery.
Well, once he's on the engine,
Yeah.
it's all on the engineer at that point. The conductor is just a window licker.
That is a great indicator.
So in
Great
terms of
indicator.
translating,
The conductor is a great indicator. Yes.
Alan, in terms of translating this as brake setup and testing, what would you recommend? Kind of a time per car. Is that a way of translating what you might translate that to a model railroad?
Yeah, probably. And of course, you're not dealing with nearly as many cars as we do. I don't know. For an average train, maybe wait a minute,
Half a minute
half a
for
minute.
railroading. Because if you're using fast clock or not.
Yeah, not a ridiculous amount of time, but just wait a few beats, and we're take a minute to charge the brake pipe, take a minute to make your reduction, take another minute to wait for the release to take effect, and away you go.
As the lone woman, I just have to ask the question. Are there very many women who are either in the work you do, or are they starting to become part of, working on trains or running trains?
They're they are certainly a minority in the industry, particularly in the operating department, and particularly on the Union Pacific locally. I know that the BNSF has quite a few more women working locally. I can only assume that that's similar system-wide. I recently had the pleasure of working with a young lady on a switch job that I worked a couple of years ago. She's since gone on to bigger and better things, not railroading, and she's happier for it. But yes, there are women.
Yeah, it's more common than it was when I first started. There was a few women, and then out of, I don't know, there's probably about 1,500 operating employees in the Northwest, and I would say probably about 100 of them are women. So there's quite a bit.
I will say this about the lady that I was working with. Her name was Lindsay. She gave far and away the clearest, best hand signals of anybody I've ever worked with. Her hand signals were perfectly spot on. They were great. It was a pleasure, and she liked giving hand signals over using the radio. And it was a pleasure working with her.
So we're getting close to the end of our time. Any last questions?
So I do have one that's kind of a loose end online. Steve Shores specifically wanted to ask Greg, other than shove, pull, and run around, what are other names are there for common switching moves, track arrangements? What switching strategies are common to get cars where they need to be? I don't know if we've covered that.
I would say, kicking cars is probably, switching is probably one of your other main move, right?
And can you explain what that is?
Kicking a car is basically you're going backwards. Cars aren't behind you, or a cut of cars or a single car or whatever. You ramp up your speed and stop suddenly. The ground crew will ask you to stop, and they'll pull the pin lifter lever so the car separates, and on momentum it travels to where, hopefully travels to where they want to go. So yeah, that's probably the other big move, which is it's technically, well, it ends up, it stops being a shove once you release the car and you let it go on its own, but
And not an easy move to replicate in model form.
right, that would be something, if you could model kicking cars, would be probably, that's probably one of the best things about working is kicking cars.
Take your
Tyler talked about dropping cars. Yeah. I've never done an active drop. It's kind of like kicking, but you're running by it. But I don't know. But I've done drops where you basically park a car, get out of the way, and you have the brake pin up there, pop the handbrake. And they'll either ride the car and tie it down when they need to, hopefully, or they'll just let it go. Usually to a track, sometimes in industry. There was industries who did. The first time I did it was at an asphalt plant up in Edmonds, or Richmond Beach, I guess. And they sent me on this cut of cars, and they said, tie the brake. I was a student, said, tie that handbrake, but don't tie it too soon, otherwise you're going to get us stuck in here. So they sent me down this track on like 15 asphalt cars, hoping I would stop them in time. So,
yeah, there's different types of drops. So the simplest drop, you pull the cut of cars toward a facing point switch. You get the cars rolling at an appropriate speed. This requires at least 3 crew members to do it. The engineer, somebody riding the cars where the cut needs to be made, generally behind the locomotive, and then a 3rd crew member standing at the switch. So you get the cars rolling, You let the slack bunch a little bit on the signal of the guy riding the cars. He pulls the pin, he tells you to go ahead, you race ahead of the cars. You get over the switch, and once you clear the switch, the guy at the switch will line it for the other route. Those cars will roll down that track, and hopefully we'll have enough momentum to clear the switch. And then the engine, you reverse over the switch and then grab those cars from the other direction. One of the only times I've ever participated in a drop as the engineer, I didn't get them rolling fast enough. And those cars stopped and had us frogged in a frog. We were blocked in the industry track. And that was actually the third screw up in a row on that shift. So it was an interesting, memorable day. So anyway, that's a simple drop. I'm sorry.
How'd you fix it?
Went home.
So the first screw up of the day, we ran through a switch, and it's the only switch I have ever run through, and it was particularly embarrassing for a couple of reasons. So he was talking about we were talking about our favorite locomotives being the SW class, the end cab switch engines. I was on one of those. This is up in Seattle Argo Yard, actually across the BN main line from Argo Yard. And we pulled two cars out of an industry called Golden Grain, went around the corner to the next industry track where cars were held off spot for Golden Grain. So we went up to retrieve two loaded cars. As we're pulling up there, this BN switch job is trundling down the track toward us. You know, it's all yard limits. There's nothing dangerous about this. So we're stopped on the same track on opposite sides of the switch. My crew gets down, their crew gets down, they decide what we're gonna do. And it's decided that we're gonna get in the clear in this track and let the BN job go by. Sounds simple enough. So I'm on an end cap switcher. I'm looking right down on the switch. I can see it clear as day. I watched my foreman line that switch against me and waved me back, and I ran through that damn switch. And the BN crew thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. So that was the first screw up. We get out of their way somewhere else, found a spike and a hammer. So we were able to get back over the switch, get the BN job out of the way. And then my crew went back and fixed the switch. I was working with a couple of old heads who had been through, they had fixed many a run through switch, so it was no big deal for them. We didn't tell anybody. Switch worked fine when they were done with it. So now we finally get the two loads that we started with, and we go back to Golden Grain. Well, when we left Golden Grain, we left one loaded car in there up against the wheel stops at the end of the track. And into that industry, it's actually downhill around a left-hand curve, and the loads are of flour, and there's flour dust everywhere. So I'd worked this job a few times previously, and the crew always cut the air in. So I had control of the automatic brake, mainly because of this little grade that we had to go down. Well, they didn't do it this time, and I didn't notice. So we're shoving back to Golden Grain, and I set 10 pounds of air, and nothing happened. And we're into the track. We're getting close to that car. I put the engine in emergency, and we slammed into the car that we left in there and popped the first set of wheels over the wheel stop. So that was screw up number 2. We had to report that one. We weren't able to fix that. And then we did the drop, screwed that up. And in order to correct that one of the guys had to go back to the switch that we had run through to retrieve a length of like 4x4 that they had used as a lever to fix the switch, brought it back and used it to pull the cars out of our way. So anyway, that was the result of a simple, relatively straightforward drop. But those are supposed to be a piece of cake, but there's also a move.
It is like model railroad.
Yeah, so there's also a drop known as a Dutch drop, or maybe a flying switch. I don't know, there's a few different. So a Dutch drop, as I understand it, and this is absolutely illegal. I've never participated in one. But what you do is you pull the cars toward a trailing point switch. And hopefully you do it a long way away from that trailing point switch. You get them rolling, you cut away, you go up over the switch, you stop the engine, line the switch, get out of the way, line the switch back, let the cars roll by, and then come out and grab the cars. Very dangerous move.
Well, in the old days, cars, equipment had poles. Remember, underneath the running board and underneath the tender?
Yeah.
And if you'd split a switch, cars following the switch, you just get the pole out, stick them between the polling pockets. It's been quite a while.
Yes,
Since the box
polling,
cars had.
polling,
On the logging railroads, they purposely would split a switch. Say you want to reverse a crane, you run the trucks up one side, throw the switch, throw the other trucks up the other side, and reverse that probably, you turn the whole car around. Yeah, just like that.
but that's because there wasn't any brake rating.
Exactly.
No
Well,
brakes.
there was, but they undid it.
Yeah.
They undid all the car pits.
So guys, we have about just a few minutes left here. Last words before what to do on our model roads before we break up for this evening.
I've talked about it.
What I would suggest is just have a purpose for them. You have some type of car forwarding system to use, and above all, just have fun. I mean, it's the good thing is with model railroading is it's hopefully, besides X-Acto knives, it's not that dangerous. So just enjoy it. I mean, the best thing is if you misroute a car on my railroad, it doesn't matter. It's not going to North Platte. Unless your railroad goes to North Platte. But I mean, for the most part, you're not gonna get into trouble. You can easily fix, especially just 5.0 it. Other than that, just have fun.
I agree with everything you just said. I'll add, get people over to operate. I built my railroad for years and then never had anybody run it until a couple of years, maybe 2 years ago. And it's a lot of fun. It's like having people actually run it. And then you learn. That's how you learn to operate, right? You're like, oh, well, that didn't work, or this works, and it just gets better, So
Chance to show it off.
yeah, chance to show it off.
Yeah. See it come to life.
Any other questions?
Well done.
All right.